All right. Welcome, everybody watching on YouTube. Believe it or not, yes, this is another speedrun episode after a month and change. I am back and hopefully better than ever. I'd just like to take a moment before we dive in to thank everybody who has offered their words of support in the last month or so. If you're watching this and sort of totally unaware of the context, obviously I won't get into everything from scratch. You can do your own research, but let's just say the last month and a half has been a pretty difficult one. I've had to set aside content creation and focus on more urgent matters, but everyone's words of support, and I've received tons of emails, YouTube comments, obviously Twitch chat, which has really made me realize how important the speedrun is for people, and I greatly appreciate that. It's a tremendous privilege to be able to do what I do for a living and to benefit from the greatest possible audience. It's really good to feel appreciated, and it accelerated the process of regaining motivation. So let's make this episode count. It won't be a very long one, but hopefully we can get some good games in. Let's start with a 10-minute game and go from there. So we have white here against Adhivi from India. Good luck. All right, another speedrun episode underway with 1e4. Okay, so e5. Oh, man, I've forgotten how to do this. It's like I have to regain my, like teacher Danya has to, I have to put that hat back on. Okay, so knight f3, knight c6, and finally we're getting more main lines. Of course, in the early part of the speedrun, we were facing a lot of Philidors, but finally, I think once we cross like 1400, we're going to face, we're going to get a lot more Glek systems, and I'll be able to delve deeper into the intricacies of the Glek, which I know people are excited about. So we have a mainline Glek, g3, bishop c5, bishop g2. We faced this before, and black plays correctly with d6. Of course, the Glek system is sort of my central recommendation for this speedrun. When I get to a higher rating, I might also diversify a little bit, but for now, we're playing the Glek exclusively. So here, the move order is not essential. You can start by castling, or you can start by playing d3. As far as I know, it's virtually interchangeable. I'm going to play d3 in this game, and our opponent plays bishop e6. Doesn't really impact what we do. We castle. And queen d7. Okay, so this particular system is not very common at the top level. At the top level, you see people in this position generally castling kingside, and then both sides castle kingside, and we get kind of a more positional battle. This may seem very scary to less experienced Glek players, because you might already be building up a scenario where black is going to go bishop h3, and black is going to run the h-pawn down the board, and black is going to castle queenside, and we're going to get checkmated. Of course, in reality, there are many, many ways to fight this type of system, and black's position contains a lot more flaws and holes than you might realize looking at this position superficially. So white has a couple of ways to fight this system. Those of you who've been watching attentively my previous Glek games might know that knight a4 should always be on your radar as long as black has not pushed the a-pawn. So that's the reason you see a lot of top players playing a5 or a6, is they're trying to defend against knight a4. But in this particular position, I'm not a huge fan of knight a4, because it doesn't really do anything against bishop h3. And if we trade on c5 in that position, black will basically clamp down on the d4 square. So I'm not sure that that's the right recipe here. Some of you are proposing knight to g5. Also, I don't like that move because of bishop g4. And unfortunately, you cannot play f3 because that move is illegal. So knight g5, bishop g4 just kind of fails concretely because then black will play h6, and what have we achieved? The move that I like, and this might come as a surprise to you, actually. I think a lot of people might find this move strange, is bishop g5. And largely, this is a positional move. And our opponent walks right into it. Our opponent basically was like, I'm going to play bishop h3 against everything. What is the point of bishop g5? It's very simple. We want to play bishop takes f6, completely hamstringing black's ability to generate any kind of pawn play on the king side. But things actually get a lot worse for black. Black is borderline losing. What should you notice here? You should notice the fact that the king and the queen are on forkable squares. And the move here is automatic, knight to d5. And suddenly, black is in huge trouble. Now, our opponent continues to play instantly, but that doesn't make his moves any better. Now, well, we can take on h3 and take on f6, but that doesn't make any sense. We can just start by taking on f6. That's a free pawn. Queen e6, only move. And now we need to pause and think. Now we need to pause and think because we need to figure out, do we have a forced win? Do we have a way to win material? Or do we need to just drop our knight back to d5 and kind of stabilize the position? So what comes to mind here? Well, some of you might be enticed by knight g5, but that's a bad move. Because knight g5, queen takes f6, yeah, you're able to eliminate the bishop with check, but then the king steps away. And again, this knight on g5 is very, very awkward. It has to then go back to f3. I'm not sure that's the most we can squeeze out of the position. What else exists? Well, the other option is to play bishop takes h3, queen takes h3, and there to play the move knight to g5. And in that position, the queen is almost trapped. Like the queen only has one square, and that's queen h6. And in that position, we need to figure out, does white have a clear-cut follow-up? I'm not seeing anything off the top of my head because both knights are hanging. So knight takes f7 isn't really effective there. And okay, you could throw in a check on g4, but that all seems very complicated. And one thing that I've been emphasizing throughout the speedrun is the power of a simple move. Like, if you notice that a particular line is very messy, consider avoiding it by playing a very simple alternative, such as knight back to d5. Okay, our opponent completely ignores any of the threats that we've been creating and walks right into knight g5. So it worked like a charm. It worked like a charm. And black resigns. So that was pretty simple. What's funny is I have never analyzed the move bishop e6, so I can't guarantee that I reacted correctly, which is why I'll check this with an engine. But again, you see the power of the Glek system. It's not an opening that you play in order to get a long middle game. You can score a lot of miniatures in the Glek if black does not react appropriately. So this is not a coincidence that we won a game so quickly. Let me plug this into ChessBase, just a moment. Okay, so let's see what insights we can generate. Let's see what insights we can generate. Pull up the chat here. All right. So we fast forward through all of the theoretical moves. Now, who can tell me in this position, short castles is actually a mistake? Who can tell me why? And I've talked about this many times already in the Glek. This is one of the things that makes the Glek fun to play. Black makes all these, common sense developing moves, and he's just much worse after knight takes e5. The center fork trick works perfectly here. Knight e5, d4. And you might remember that after bishop d6, de5, bishop e5, white doesn't stop there. Actually, I don't remember the move order. Let me double check this. I don't remember the move order here. So it's either, you start by castling kingside. And if black plays d6 here, then you have this very powerful move, knight e2, and black has no good way to defend against the threat of f4. Yeah, so one thing I've emphasized here is you don't want to play f4 in this position because it allows bishop takes c3 check, and you want to avoid this scenario where the bishop on c1 is stuck behind the f-pawn. Also, the e-pawn is very weak here, and black can play rook e8. Black could even play knight takes e4. Simple tactic, and white's position collapses. So the priority here is to castle. Now, you're not as worried about bishop c3 in this position. This is a very different situation. The king is already castled, which means you have the move rook e1. And we're not too afraid of, slightly damaging our queenside pawn structure because we have a lot of assets in return. We have the bishop pair. We have a good center. White is slightly better. So anyways, in the game, black played d6. We played d3. Bishop e6 is already not a great move. So the computer suggests knight a4 in this position. Interesting, knight a4 straight away. And if black plays queen d7, the computer suggests, nice. So here the computer suggests knight g5, and after bishop g4, we start by snagging the bishop on c5, and we also hit the queen. And in this position, what move is possible, unlike the situation where I talked about knight g5? Which move can white now play? Yeah, computers really like the bishop pair in general. So what do we do here with white? Yeah, so now we play f3. And actually, if you're a King's Indian player, this is pretty habitual. So bishop h5, obviously. And now the best move is knight h3. Now, why do I mention the King's Indian? We get a very similar sequence in a lot of King's Indian lines. So, for example, in the Gligorish system, which is mainline King's Indian, let me think. So knight f3, castles, bishop e2. Just as a sample, this happens in a lot of different lines. Here, for instance, black's most popular move is knight g4, bishop g5, f6. Very similar. And after bishop h4, if you're uninitiated in the King's Indian, you might be very worried about this knight. Like, how does this knight get back into society? But the way that it does that is through the h6 square. You go knight h6, you drop the knight away, making kind of space for the kingside pawn stage forward, and the knight can reroute via f7. So in a very similar, by the same vein, you have knight to h3. We want to go g4 and f4, and we have the bishop pair, and the black bishop is very misplaced. So let's say black castles queenside. We can even start by castling kingside, and then we can go bishop e3, knight f2, and eventually we can prepare f4. Notice that if black goes knight takes e4, trying to exploit the double pin, how does white refute this move? Who can tell me? I mean, it's a simple but important little detail. What should white do? Yeah, so g4, highlighting just how misplaced the bishop is. If the bishop drops back, now we can play f3, obviously. So, good to know. Knight a4 straight away was the most accurate response, but there's nothing wrong with castles, queen d7. And yeah, bishop g5 is the best move. Bishop g5 is the best move. And I already think bishop h3 is probably a mistake. Wow, after bishop h3, it's +3. So believe it or not, this totally natural move is a decisive mistake. Black actually has to move the knight. Black cannot allow bishop takes f6 because positionally, it's suicidal. And the reason is, okay, let's say black castles queenside. It's just this structure does not allow black to attack on the king side because we can plant a knight on h4. Now we have access to this beautiful square on f5, and the other knight can also jump into d5. But bishop h3 is even worse. Yeah, because after knight d5, there's no way to defend this pawn. This is just a forced win. Castles queenside. Yeah, knight takes f6. Perfectly fine. Queen e6. And I played probably the suboptimal move, but perfectly fine. Knight d5. And, okay, black lost the game on the spot with h5. What I would have done with black is probably kept the bishop pair with bishop g4. But one thing to remember is if black castles queenside in the Glek and you move the knight away from c3, what typical kind of sequence allows you to start a rapid pawn storm on the queenside? Who can tell me what the best move is here for white? This is a pretty standard kind of move in general. So it's not c4. This is bad. It's not c4. Because c4, first of all, it weakens the d4 square. Why would you give black the outpost? You don't need another defender on the knight. So the move is actually c3, because this kills two birds with one stone. Some of you are saying a3. Okay, that's the right idea. But why not go c3 to cover the d4 square and prepare b4, a4, etc.? Potentially, the queen can also join the attack if necessary. So let's say black plays king b8. Now you play b4 and a4. Black has to make a very weakening move, such as a5. Wow, and now the top move is queen to b1. Very cute. Unpinning the knight and creating an x-ray against the king on the b file. And you see where this is going. So the situation is dire for black in either case. So a simple Glek game. Good takeaway is knight a4 is a very common theme in most positions. This is why actually black's best move is a5. You might remember that if black castles kingside, my recommendation is actually still to play knight a4 and collect the bishop pair. So simple game. Nothing to write home about. Let's do one more 10-minute game. One more 10-minute game if you guys are not against it. Pull up the chat again. All right, here we go. And we have white again. Okay, nice. Okay, so we're facing a Caro-Kann, which means another... Oops! We face d6. Okay, that's okay. f3 is actually not such a bad move. I don't know why I pre-moved it. But there's nothing wrong with playing f3 here, obviously. So black is playing some troll opening. Let's see where black does. Is black going to like put every pawn? No. Black is not going to put every pawn in the 6th. But actually, it's funny. F3 against like the Pirc setup is not bad either, because You might be familiar with sort of the English attack type setup. So let's supplement that with bishop e3. H6. I don't get exactly what black is doing, but as I've said many times, when you're facing one of, a million troll setups that are in existence, first of all, you need to tailor your response to the specific line your opponent is playing. You shouldn't play the same way against everything, but you also shouldn't expect to win the game in 5 moves. There's no reason the black setup is going to lose right out of the opening. So you need to be patient. You need to develop your pieces, and eventually you're going to get a chance to launch a pretty easy attack, let's say against the king. So right away, I guess partially because I ended up playing f3, that kind of dictates our setup. I would not want to castle kingside already. I think, as you should kind of intuitively sense, castling to the queen side is the proper way to continue here. And also you should remember that development is not always a race. So a move that, newer players might play here is bishop c4, right? Or like bishop d3. But to me, that seems a little bit awkward, especially bishop c4 is very awkward because it walks right into moves like b5. So a move I would consider here is knight g to e2. But I think it's better to start by just finishing the queenside development with queen d2, get your king to the queenside, and now you can worry about your kingside pieces. Another interesting approach is to push f4 and then deploy the knight to f3. Yeah, that's possible. That's possible. But I want to kind of maintain the integrity of my structure. Now here, I would continue to delay the development of my kingside pieces. You just don't need to get them out yet. And instead, of course, anytime your opponent plays any fianchetto setup, your instinct should be to play h4. And what's interesting about this move is that it's largely a positional move, right? So your reaction to this might be, but I don't get the move h4 because black is not castled to the king side. And what are you trying to achieve? If you play h5, black's just going to go g5 and lock the position up. So what on earth is white actually trying to achieve? And here I'm going to introduce a really important idea. This is actually one of my favorite attacking ideas, and it's a great way to dismantle this kind of flimsy setup. So you actually still play the move h5. And does anybody know what follow-up move makes this idea magical? So this is not a particularly weak pawn chain, but g5 pawn is a hook, and you can use the hook to push f4 in order to open up the king side and the center and to provide a nice avenue toward attacking the weak d6 pawn. So this is an idea that's very common to these Pirc and modern openings. Black plays like the ugliest move in the position, and that immediately signals to me that there is going to be some sort of explosion in the center that's going to cause black's position to collapse. But we don't need to look for an explosion in the center just yet. Let's start by going knight f3. Let's wait for black to put their cards on the table while developing our pieces. We're also not afraid of g4, because then the knight has an easy pathway to the g6 square. That's an excellent outpost. Now let's actually go a3 and shut down any potential pawn counterplay on the queen side. It's a good tempo investment. There's no need to hurry. Knight b6. Okay, now I think it's time to get down to business, roll up our sleeves. But maybe not even just yet. Maybe we can play bishop d3, complete our development, and then we can start looking. Or alternatively, there's a very, very tempting tactical move. There's actually several tempting moves, and I don't think that I can resist. I think it's time to strike now. Because if we give black one more tempo, black can go knight e7. And then black will have the option of castling to the king side. So what tempting move am I referring to here? Who can tell me? I mean, there's really two moves that are very similar to each other, and they generally accomplish the same thing. They kind of open up the center. But anytime there's like 3 different pawns and pieces that are all controlling the d5 square, that's the square that you want to strike on in order to extract the maximum damage. Does that make sense? So one of the moves is e5, but the move that I'm going to play is actually d5. And what influences the choice is also the fact that we're making contact with the knight on b6. So apart from all of black's other problems, the queen is also largely tied up on d8. The game is over. Black is completely lost. And you might say, well, I have to calculate, like there's a lot of calculation to do. There's no calculation you have to do here. because there's no magic in chess. We have a million pieces developed. Black has basically 0. And black has pawn weaknesses everywhere, especially in the center. So CD, we can throw in a check on b5 if we want to. It's unnecessary. That check is not going anywhere. Let's just take. So I'm anticipating e5. Although, okay, there's many things that our opponent could do now. Okay, e5 played. Now, again, this type of position is a little bit hard to teach because there are so many good moves on every move. There's like so many ways to attack. But I'm really partial to starting by exploiting the knight on b6. So this is a very weak knight, and it would be nice if we could deflect the queen, but we can't deflect the queen. Instead, we can force this knight back, which then cramps black's development even further by shutting down the bishop. So some of you are thinking about bishop d3 and bishop g6. That maneuver is possible, but also remember, black is attacking your f4 pawn. Like this f4 pawn is actually hanging right now. So I'm talking about queen f2. The knight literally has only one square, which is d7. It has to go back to d7. Why is that beneficial to white? Well, for several reasons. First of all, I mean, it makes black's development even worse. But the main reason I want to induce knight d7 is that the d6 pawn now has become a very easily attackable target. And it can be targeted, well, the simplest method is to go knight e4 or knight to b5. I'm not sure if we want to do that immediately or not, but that's kind of my logic. I actually don't think we want to do it immediately. What should we start with? Like, what move can be thrown in just so that we don't have to worry about any headaches related to like gf or ef? Yeah, so I'm just talking about fe or fg. Actually, fe, maybe there's knight takes e5, so let's play fg. Just a small subtlety. Okay, black recaptures with the f pawn. And now I think it's time for the final invasion. Knight b5. And black has way too many weak squares and weak pawns to worry about. The position just collapses on its own. Like if the queen moves, then we have a fork. If the knight moves to protect the d pawn, we have the move bishop b6. Very common idea to set up the fork on c7. That's it. I mean, there's nothing else black can do. And king e7 is not serious for like a million reasons. And maybe king e7 is the best move. Like probably in terms of practical chances, black should try king e7. But okay, who's going to do that? Maybe this guy. Yeah, the wheels are falling off black's position. And this is why, you know, these types of setups, you just have to respond very patiently to them. We finished our queenside development. Then we kind of opened up the position a little bit. Then we took a couple moments to shut down black's play and complete our development or come very close. And then it was very, very easy. King e7 played. Okay, nice. So we need to keep hammering away at black's position. Or not. Actually, I think now is the perfect time to complete our development with bishop d3. So you might be looking at sacrifices like knight takes g5 might be very tempting to some people. I'll show after the game why it's not as convincing as you might think. But now that our pieces are fully developed, we also have the access. We have access to a move like rook hf1 or rook he1. But what is the nicest way of shutting this game down? Let's think. You can see it's not that easy, actually, to put the finishing touches. And we can continue playing positionally. Like, there's absolutely no hurry. If we want to sit on the position, we can even play a move like c4. And moves like c4, just solidifying the pawn on d5, making sure that everything is nicely defended. And now we can make simple moves to bring pieces into the game. And eventually, there's going to be a winning tactic. Like, that's just the way that attacking chess works. So let's think for a second. Okay, I have a cool idea. I'm deciding between rook hf1 and rook he1. But before we do any of that, let's stick the bishop on g6. Nice little outpost. Let's stick the bishop on this square. Yes, I'm aware that black had the move e4, but I won't. I'll talk about that after the game. Now we're going to go and bring the rook into the center, not worrying about bishop takes b5 because that gives us a complete monopoly over the light squares. Our opponent's going to give a check on c8, and we're going to tuck our king away on b1. That would be my guess. I have to say, like, black is defending very, very well here. But if you keep hammering away at your opponent's position, something is going to give eventually. Okay, so I think something is just given. The moment knight c5 happened, I'm paying attention to black's center. I mean, that's actually partially why I played rook he1. And now you have to start looking at direct sacrifices. So what sequence can you come up with here that basically causes black's center to explode? Well, you might be kind of paying attention to the move knight takes c5. But if you play that move immediately, black might have an intermezzo on b3. So I'm actually going to start with bishop takes c5. And now it's time for the decisive blow, knight takes c5. This is very simple. And after d takes c5, assuming black takes the knight, you should pause, because that is actually an important moment. Because there is a way to win on the spot. There is a way to win on the spot here. This is where a lot of people botch these types of games. You respond automatically, and then suddenly the game drags on. And the longer the game drags on, you know, the more chances there are of something weird happening. So a lot of you might be just grabbing this pawn on e5 instinctively. Then the black king evacuates to g8. And white is completely winning, but there is a way to eliminate all of the adventures. And it's not d6. That's the same type of problem. But have you considered all of the checks? Yeah, queen takes c5 check. I would say the least intuitive of white's checks. And there's only 3. But this one is the most winning. And it's all because of a tactical detail. If black plays queen d6, you have to spot what follow-up move. You have to spot what follow-up move. Obviously, you should see that the queen is pinned. The secret sauce is rook takes e5 check, king d7, and then you have to spot another follow-up move, and that one wins the game and leads to checkmate. And that one wins the game and leads to checkmate. Yeah, bishop f5, very good. Bishop f5, very good, and that's game over. Yeah, so this took a little bit of calculation, but this is forcing calculation. And it's kind of symbolic that the light squares win the game for white. That's partially why we deployed the bishop to g6. Yeah, now black is thinking. Now, obviously, as I'll show you after the game, this is unnecessary. Like, you can play rook takes e5 and d6 and be completely winning. So I'm not creating the illusion that it's only thanks to this resource that the sack on e5 is winning. Not at all. As a matter of fact, you should understand why conceptually a move like knight e5 can largely be played without calculating too many variations. Like, you don't have to really see anything past d takes e5. You should just sense that it's totally winning. Yeah, so now black is thinking. Now, these games can be a little bit hard to teach. I would characterize this as a messy attacking game. Why messy? Because, first of all, if you run this on the computer, you will find probably that I made, like, almost none of my moves were top computer choice. Like, probably there was some computer method. I think this is all correct. Let's just finish the game first. Queen d6. Okay, it's mate in 1. You will probably find that, like, starting from move 13, most of my moves were suboptimal because it's almost impossible to play ultra accurate computer moves in positions where there's like 7 or 8 moves at every turn that lead to a big advantage, if that makes sense. And our opponent put up some really good resistance. So the key is to appreciate like the general grounding behind the moves that I make rather than bogging down in all of the tactical details. Like the general takeaway from this game is going to be your approach to attacking rather than specifically, you know, like attacking subtleties, because you're going to get your own type of attacking game. Let me copy this. With that said, of course, there were some like pretty important subtleties. So we'll end the speedrun with this game. This will be a slightly shorter one, and for the night, just wanted to kind of get the tradition back up, get this up on YouTube. So let's see. Unfortunately, yeah, I played the move f3. Obviously, like, if I knew that my opponent would go d6, I would play knight c3. That would be my standard reaction, but nothing wrong with f3. Now, black, of course, should probably go e5. This would be the best of you know, the best move available to black, or like knight f6 and then g6 going into a Pirc. But instead, black played, you know, an ultra passive setup, h6. That's another weird move. Okay, so I think I did a good job of explaining my initial setup. Yeah, so h4 is one big takeaway. This idea of driving the pawn to h5 and then provoking g5 and playing f4. So h5, g5, f4. Yeah, f6 is probably not f6, I would say, is the losing move. I think that to keep himself in the game, black would probably have had to go g4. But okay, obviously this is still very, very bad, and we can play f5 if necessary. If black takes on f4, this is similarly very depressing. Like e5, d takes e5, the position opens up. Black can't really take with a knight. And we just drop our bishop back to e3. Also notice that black cannot castle in these situations ever, because the pawn on h6 is going to fall. So what is white's best move? Wow, according to the computer, the best move is rook h4 to cover the g4 square. The human reaction here would probably be knight f3. But why do you think rook h4 is so important? Well, it's because of knight g4. And if you drop your bishop back to g1, you're allowing black to castle, which doesn't solve all of black's problems, of course, but this is a cool, prophylactic type move, rook h4. Just chilling on h4. Because anytime the black knight moves away, you have rook g4. Kind of interesting. So anyways, our opponent played f6, we play knight f3. Just developing. And very patient, right? a4, a3, there is no hurry. Knight b6. Now that almost all of our pieces are developed, d5 works like a charm. So cd, ed, e5. Yeah, so again, don't try to analyze games like this with the computer, because the top computer move is insane. It's unfindable. If you want to know what the top computer move is, it's knight e4. Like, what the heck? Okay, g takes f4. Can anybody figure out the idea of the move knight e4? Like, now that the move has been played, I think the follow-up is very much findable. Just like totally ignoring the pieces that black is capturing, and instead going after the d6 pawn. Yeah, queen b4. Just hitting the d6. This is actually a fork against b6 and d6. And if f takes e3, knight d6 check, everything collapses for black, because if you step onto the f8 square, then white just eliminates a bunch of minor pieces. And if king to d7... See, I wouldn't even be confident here. I wouldn't be completely confident in white's play here, but the computer just goes knight f7. Slightly weird move. Oh yeah, queen... Okay, where do you go? Like, if queen c7, then bishop b5 is like basically checkmate. If the queen goes to f8, you just take the knight. And if black takes the knight, bishop b5 check, and then d6 check, and then queen d8 is checkmate. So this is how the computer finishes the game. I don't think anybody in their right mind would consider knight e4. I think queen f2 is much more human. I just wanted to make one comment, which is that I think d5 is a lot better than e5. I think e5 is a similar type of move, but it doesn't open up the bishop, right? So that's a major advantage of the move d5. Also, the fact that the queen and the rook are aligned on the d file, and d5 comes very close to just opening that file up. The problem with e5 is black can go gf and then de. And in order to recapture, you're going to have to allow the queen trade. So just doing a little bit of calculation helps determine why d5 is the better move. So I played queen f2, I took on g5, and I played knight b5, just hitting the pawn. And after king e7, again, patience, right? So I didn't see a forced win. A lot of you were like screaming for knight takes g5. This is not convincing at all. Black just blocks the check with the bishop. Like, why would you bother sacrificing a piece unless you're pretty confident that it's winning? So just bishop d3, just developing. And then again, just very patient. Knight gf6, c4. Protect the pawn. Now, if black plays e4, I wasn't worried about this at all because we have the move rook e1. And anytime the e file opens, black is just busto. If the king moves, we also get the d4 square and access to e6. So you should not be afraid of e4 here. I mean, there's a million things white can do. Even if you just drop one of these pieces, it's probably good for white to open the e file. And now bishop g6, another patient move. Bishop a6, another patient move. So I'm not sacking anything, no tactics. And the tactics kind of appear on their own. Eventually, you're going to get a chance. We got the chance here. Bishop takes and knight takes e5. And the last thing I wanted to say is, like, this position is also completely winning for white because you're just going to go d7 and rook e8. So it's not like I had to see queen takes c5. In fact, I did not see queen takes e5 at first. Like, when I first took on c5, I was fully planning to take on e5 and go d6 and win the game. I mean, just look at black's position. Total paralysis. The pawn is rumbling forward. The knight can never move because of checkmate. So, still don't understand how we put rook e1 with black's pawn there. Yeah, so like, the logic behind a move like rook e1 is basically this. Black's king cannot move because if it moves, then black drops the d6 pawn. Okay, obviously, like once black took on b5, black's king can move. But if black's king moves, then it moves on to the f file, and it's going to be x-rayed once again. The point of a move like rook e1 is to prepare for the eventuality that the center opens up further. So of course, like I had the thought of sacking on e5. I also had the thought that like, okay, maybe black will play e4 at some point. It's just a good idea to bring your pieces into the center in general, but especially when your opponent has their king in the center. So like there isn't a specific aim with a move like rook e1. It's just assembling your pieces on solid attacking squares. Okay, so even knight fd4, yeah, exactly, even knight fd4. Like even ideas like this become available, just accessing all the outposts. And I'm not saying specific, okay, even here, yeah, bishop f4 check, and black, I think, is completely lost. So when you play a game like this and your attack fails, it's a great opportunity to learn like attacking techniques and ideas. And like these types of skills, I think the reason people are uncomfortable with them, or you might look at this game and say, well, I wouldn't have been able to do that, is because it isn't like a specific skill. It's a composite of several skills, like sensing the moment to open the center, knowing when to play patiently, and then obviously tactical vision, spotting like the final combination. All of those are implicated in and necessary to play a game like this, and they come with experience. Like you might be good at some of those things, but not others. So just keep playing games like this, and eventually you'll get better at those skills. So that's what I'd say. And on that note, we're going to end the speedrun, folks. I'm a little bit tired. It's late. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and definitely the speedrun ain't going anywhere. I'll try to get in a longer episode for the next one. So thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good one. And I'll end the stream here and wish you guys a very pleasant start to your Friday. Pretty successful stream. I'll see you guys later. Bye.